The scent hit me before I even saw her. My signature perfume, the custom blend I'd commissioned from that exclusive Parisian perfumer 3 years ago. Jasmine, bergamot, and a hint of black vanilla. It cost more than most people's monthly rent, and there was only one bottle in existence. Mine. Except now my sister was wearing it to my wedding. I stood frozen at the entrance to the bridal suite, watching through the partially open door as Melissa glided through my getting ready room like she owned it. She was greeting my bridesmaids, air kissing my friends, her wrists and throat radiating that achingly familiar scent that everyone associated with me. The scent that had become my trademark, my identity. "Oh, this old thing?" I heard her laugh, that tinkling, performative sound she used when she wanted to seem humble. "I just grabbed whatever was on my dresser this morning. You know how it is." My dresser, my perfume, my wedding day. My maid of honor, Sophie, wrinkled her nose slightly. "It smells really familiar, Melissa, like expensive taste?" Melissa interrupted smoothly, touching her collarbone where she'd clearly sprayed extra. I've always had a nose for the finer things. I should have been surprised. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt that strange, cold clarity that had been my constant companion since the moment I opened my eyes 6 months ago in my childhood bedroom, 18 years old again, with all my memories intact. Because this wasn't the first time Melissa had worn my perfume to my wedding. In my first life, she'd done exactly this. She'd stolen into my room the morning of my wedding to Marcus Blackwood, found my custom perfume, and drenched herself in it. When I'd confronted her, she'd cried and said she just wanted to feel close to me on my special day, that she'd been so emotional she wasn't thinking clearly. I'd forgiven her, like I always did. I'd hugged her and told her it was fine, that we could share. That wedding had been the beginning of the end. Marcus had been confused all day, turning toward Melissa when she passed, his nostrils flaring slightly. "You smell different," he'd said to me during our first dance, a slight frown creasing his forehead. By the reception, he'd asked Melissa 3 times if she was wearing perfume, and she'd played coy, blushing and touching his arm. Within a year, they were having an affair. Within 2, I was dead. The poison had been slow acting, arsenic in my tea every morning for 6 months. Melissa had served it to me herself, smiling sweetly, telling me how pale I looked, how I should really see a doctor. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I died in a hospital bed, listening to my mother sob about how tragic it was, watching Melissa clutch Marcus's hand, already wearing my engagement ring underneath her gloves. But something had given me a second chance. I'd woken up on my 18th birthday, gasping, clutching my chest, where my heart should have stopped. The calendar on my wall read 6 years earlier. I was back in my childhood bedroom, back in the house where everything had gone so terribly wrong. But this time I remembered everything. Every betrayal, every poisoned cup of tea, every lie. This time I would be ready. "Are you going to go in?" I turned to find my new maid of honor, Claire, standing behind me. Not Sophie. In this timeline, I'd carefully distanced myself from Sophie after remembering how she'd testified at my death that I'd always been dramatic and probably took too many pills by accident. How she'd sided with Melissa when it mattered most. "In a moment," I said, keeping my voice light. I just needed a second to breathe. Claire smiled warmly. She had no idea that I'd chosen her specifically because in my first life, she'd been the only one to question the circumstances of my death. The only one who'd told the police that Melissa's grief seemed performative and convenient. I pushed open the door fully and stepped inside. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. I was already in my wedding dress, a completely different style from my first wedding. Where before I'd worn a romantic flowing gown with long sleeves and a sweetheart neckline, today I wore a sleek, modern sheath dress with an architectural neckline and my hair in a severe, elegant updo. Everything about me was different this time. Everything except the groom. "Vivian!" Melissa rushed forward, arms outstretched, and I caught another overwhelming wave of jasmine and bergamot. "Oh my God, you look absolutely stunning! I can't believe my baby sister is getting married." She was 26 to my 24. The baby sister thing was a power play she'd used my entire life. I let her hug me, feeling the expensive silk of her bridesmaid dress, the one I'd deliberately chosen in a shade of chartreuse that made her look sallow, press against my gown. Over her shoulder, I caught Claire's eye and gave her the tiniest nod. "Melissa," Claire said, her voice honey-sweet with an edge of steel, "is that Vivian's perfume you're wearing?" Melissa pulled back, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "What? No, It is," one of my cousins piped up, frowning. "I recognize it. Vivian always wears that scent. She had it custom made in Paris." "The bottle cost $12,000, Claire added, examining her nails casually. "There's only one in existence. Vivian showed us the certificate of authenticity last month." I watched the color drain from Melissa's face, then surge back in an angry red flush. "I must have accidentally grabbed the wrong bottle this morning," she stammered. "Our rooms are right next to each other, and the bottles look similar, and I was so rushed." "Your room is on the third floor," I said quietly, finally speaking. "Mine is on the second. And my perfume bottle is custom Baccarat crystal with my initials engraved on. It looks nothing like anything you own." The room had gone completely silent. Even the makeup artist had stopped mid-brushstroke. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, the weapon she'd used against me countless times in my first life. "I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of this on your wedding day, Viv. I was just trying to feel close to you. You know how emotional I get." "Then you can feel close to me after you wash it off," I said calmly. "There's a bathroom right there. I'll wait." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. In my first life, I would have caved by now. I would have said it was fine, would have smoothed everything over to keep the peace. But I died because I kept the peace, and I wasn't going to make that mistake again. "Vivian, that's a bit harsh," Sophie started, but Claire cut her off. "And is it? It's Vivian's signature scent. On Vivian's wedding day. Having someone else wear it is actually pretty weird when you think about it." Melissa's tears were flowing freely now. "I can't believe you'd humiliate me like this in front of everyone. After everything I've done for you. Like what?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Name one thing you've done for me, Melissa. One." She stared at me, clearly shocked by my tone. I was shocked too. In my first life, I'd been so conflict-averse, so desperate for my family's approval. But dying had given me clarity. When you've already lost everything once, you stop being afraid of losing it again. "I've been there for you," she said, her voice small and wounded. "Your whole life, I'm your sister." "Then act like it. Go wash off my perfume." For a moment, I thought she might refuse. I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing whether to throw a bigger scene or comply. Finally, she turned on her heel and stalked toward the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in awkward chatter, everyone trying to pretend that hadn't been as uncomfortable as it was. I moved to my chair in front of the vanity, and Claire squeezed my shoulder as I sat down. "You okay?" she whispered. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. Because this was just the beginning. The history of my family's dysfunction went back decades, but my story really started 18 years ago when Melissa was 8 and I was 6. That was the year our father's company, Hartley Enterprises, went public and made him a multi-millionaire overnight. That was the year we moved from our comfortable but modest home in the suburbs to the massive estate in Greenwich. That was the year our mother, Catherine, discovered that being married to wealth was very different from being wealthy herself. And that was the year Catherine decided that Melissa would be her golden child, her ticket to maintaining the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. I remembered the exact moment the dynamic shifted. Melissa had spilled juice on a white couch in our new living room, and I'd laughed because I thought it was funny. Catherine had slapped me across the face, the first time she'd ever hit me, and told me that Melissa was sensitive and I needed to be more supportive. From that day forward, everything became about Melissa. Melissa needed the bigger bedroom because she needed space to practice her violin. Melissa needed the better tutor because she was going to get into an Ivy League school. Melissa needed the newer car because she was older and it was only fair. Melissa needed my college fund because she wanted to study abroad and it was better for the family if she had every opportunity. I got the hand-me-downs, the smaller room in the back of the house, the barely functional car that broke down every other week. I got my father's absent-minded pats on the head and my mother's constant reminders that I should be grateful for what I had and stop being so selfish. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my father was on a business trip and my mother forgot to come to the ceremony because she was helping Melissa shop for sorority rush dresses. When I got a full scholarship to Columbia, Catherine told me it was nice, but not as impressive as Melissa getting into Yale, even though Melissa's acceptance had come with a substantial donation from our father. I learned to make myself small, to not need anything, to be grateful for scraps. The only thing I had that was truly mine was my nose for perfume. I'd discovered it by accident when I was 16, wandering through a Sephora while Melissa tried on makeup. I'd started mixing testers, creating combinations that somehow worked in ways they shouldn't. A sales associate had been impressed and told me I had a gift. That summer, I'd worked 3 jobs and saved enough to take a perfume-making workshop in the city. It became my escape, my identity, the one thing that was mine and mine alone. When I was 21, I'd saved enough to commission my signature scent from a master perfumer in Paris. I'd spent hours on video calls describing exactly what I wanted, something that captured hope and resilience, something that smelled like surviving. The perfumer had understood. He'd created something transcendent. The day I received it, I'd cried. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever owned, and it was perfect. It was me. For 3 years, it had been my armor. People remembered me because of that scent. At networking events and job interviews, at social gatherings, they'd smell jasmine and bergamot and think of Vivian Hartley. It made me memorable in a way I'd never been before. Then I'd met Marcus Blackwood at a charity gala where Melissa was being honored for some volunteer work she'd barely done. He'd been standing next to me at the bar, and when I'd reached for my drink, he'd inhaled sharply. "What is that scent?" he'd asked. "It's incredible." We'd talked for 3 hours. He was handsome, wealthy, kind, or so I'd thought. The heir to Blackwood Industries, one of the largest real estate development firms on the East Coast, he'd asked for my number, and I'd floated home that night feeling like maybe, finally, something was going my way. We'd dated for 2 years. He'd proposed at my favorite restaurant with a ring that must have cost a fortune. I'd said yes, thinking I was finally building a life that was mine. I'd been so stupid. The wedding had been beautiful in my first life. A spring ceremony in the gardens of my parents' estate, 300 guests, everything perfect except for Melissa wearing my perfume and the seeds of destruction being planted with every breath Marcus took. The affair had started 6 months later. I'd found out by accident, coming home early from a business trip to find Melissa's car in our driveway at 2 a.m. I'd walked in to find them on our couch, and the worst part hadn't even been the betrayal. The worst part had been that Melissa was still wearing my perfume, and Marcus had called her by my name when he climaxed. I'd filed for divorce immediately. Marcus had begged, but I'd been done. What I hadn't known was that I'd already been dead in the water. Because while I'd been fighting for my divorce, Melissa had been slowly poisoning me and systematically destroying my reputation. She'd told my mother I was having a breakdown, told my friends I'd become paranoid and unstable, told everyone who would listen that I was making up lies about her and Marcus, because I couldn't accept that my marriage had failed. By the time I'd realized what she was doing, what she'd been doing for months with the arsenic in my morning tea, it was too late. I was dying, my credibility was shot, and when I tried to tell the doctors I was being poisoned, they'd nodded sympathetically and increased my sedatives. I'd died alone, in pain, my last coherent thought being that I wished I'd been stronger. And then I'd woken up at 18 and everything had changed. The first few weeks after my rebirth had been disorienting. I'd spent hours staring at myself in the mirror, touching my face, cataloging the differences. My body was younger, unmarked by the poison that had ravaged it. My hair was longer, my hands were smooth and uncalloused, but my mind was ancient with betrayal. I'd known immediately that I had to be strategic. I couldn't just accuse Melissa of crimes she hadn't committed yet. I couldn't tell anyone about dying and coming back. They'd think I was insane. I needed to be smart, to play the long game, to dismantle everything carefully so that when the moment came, no one would question her guilt. The first thing I'd done was change my perfume. I'd taken my beloved custom scent, the bottle I'd just saved enough to buy in this timeline, and I'd hidden it in a locked box in a storage unit across town. Then I'd gone to a different perfumer and commissioned something new. Something completely opposite to my original scent. Where my signature had been bright and hopeful, my new perfume was dark and mysterious. Oud, leather, and dark rose. It was sophisticated, mature, memorable in a completely different way. When I'd started wearing it, Melissa had wrinkled her nose. "That's a bit mature for you, isn't it?" "I'm growing up," I'd said simply. The second thing I'd done was start documenting everything. I'd bought a safe in my room and started keeping detailed notes about every interaction, every slight, every moment of abuse. I'd recorded conversations on my phone. I'd saved text messages. I'd built a paper trail that I'd never had in my first life. The third thing I'd done was change my relationship with Marcus. I'd met him at the same charity gala. Some things seemed to be fixed points in time. But this time, when he'd asked about my perfume, I'd given him a mysterious smile and changed the subject. I'd been cooler, more reserved, more challenging. Instead of falling into a relationship immediately, I'd made him work for it. And work for it he had. This Marcus was more attentive than the one in my first life. He sent flowers weekly. He remembered the small details I mentioned in passing. He planned elaborate dates and introduced me to his friends as someone important, not just another girlfriend. I'd been tempted, so tempted, to just walk away from him. But I needed him, because in my first life, Marcus had been the key to everything. To Melissa's jealousy, to my mother's increased cruelty when she realized I'd won something Melissa wanted, to my father's brief moment of pride in me before it all fell apart. This time, I needed Marcus to see the truth. So I dated him. I'd let him fall in love with me. I'd accepted his proposal when it came, this time at a private dinner instead of the restaurant, this time with a different ring that I'd subtly guided him toward. And I'd planned a wedding that would be the catalyst for everything, because I remembered exactly what Melissa would do. She'd try to wear my perfume on my wedding day. And this time, everyone would notice. The ceremony was perfect. We'd married in the garden of a private estate in the Hamptons, not at my parents' house. The guest list was smaller, more curated. People I actually cared about rather than Catherine's social climbing contacts. The flowers were deep burgundy and cream instead of pink and white. Everything was different except the one thing that mattered. Marcus was still mine, and Melissa was still circling like a shark. She'd washed off my perfume. She'd had to, but I could tell it bothered her. All through the ceremony, she kept touching her wrists where the scent used to be, as if she could summon it back. She kept glancing at me, at Marcus, calculating something I couldn't quite read. After the ceremony, during cocktail hour, she cornered me by the champagne fountain. "I'm sorry about this morning," she said, her voice sweet, but her eyes hard. I really didn't mean to upset you. It's just," she paused as if gathering courage. "I've been having such a hard time lately, Viv. Seeing you so happy, getting married, it made me realize how alone I am. I just wanted to feel close to you. Can you forgive me?" In my first life, this speech had worked. I'd hugged her and told her, of course I forgave her, that she'd find someone too, that everything would be okay. "No," I said now, taking a sip of champagne. She blinked. "What?" "I don't forgive you, and I don't believe you." Her face went through several rapid changes. Shock, hurt, anger, calculation. "Vivian, I'm your sister. You're my sister who snuck into my room to steal my perfume on my wedding day," I said calmly. "That's not the action of someone who wants to feel close to me. That's the action of someone who wants to be me." "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice was too high, too defensive. "Is it? Because this isn't the first time you've taken something of mine and pretended it was yours. Remember my college essay? The one I spent months perfecting for Columbia? The one that ended up word for word in your Yale application after I left it on my desk?" Her face went white. "I don't know what or the internship I interviewed for at Hartley Enterprises. The one I was perfect for, that I prepared weeks for, that somehow went to you after you sat in on one of my practice sessions with Dad. Dad gave me that position because I was more qualified, or my senior thesis in high school. The one that won state science fair after you submitted it as your own to that scholarship committee?" Each accusation was like a slap. She was backing up now, looking around wildly to see if anyone was listening. But I'd chosen this spot carefully, isolated enough for privacy, but visible enough that people could see us talking. You've been stealing from me our entire lives, I continued, my voice low and steady. My ideas, my work, my accomplishments. And I let you because I thought that's what sisters did. That's what family did. But you wearing my perfume today made me realize something. What? She whispered, tears starting to form. You don't just want what I have. You want to be me. You want my life. That's not true, she said. But the tears were falling now, and they weren't strategic anymore. They were real. You don't understand what it's like, Viv. Mom and Dad have always expected so much from me. You got to just coast along, be mediocre, and everyone thought it was fine. But me, I had to be perfect. I had to be exceptional. And you just naturally are those things, without even trying. Do you know how infuriating that is? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. So, you made my life hell because you were jealous? I made your life hell? She laughed, a bitter sound. Poor Vivian, always the victim. You have no idea what real pressure is. No idea what it's like to be the one everyone's watching, everyone's judging. At least when you failed, no one cared. When I fail, it's a disaster. I never failed, I said quietly. You just convinced everyone I did. She stared at me, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you figured everything out? But you're still the same stupid little girl who'll forgive me tomorrow because you're too weak to hold a grudge. We'll see, I said and walked away. Behind me, I heard her make a small, frustrated sound. But I didn't look back. I had a wedding reception to enjoy and phase 2 of my plan to initiate. The reception was in full swing when I found my father. Richard Hartley was holding court near the bar, surrounded by business associates and admirers. At 62, he was still handsome in that distinguished way wealthy men manage. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that made investors trust him with millions. He'd barely spoken to me all day, but that was normal. I'd learned long ago that I only mattered to my father when I was useful to him. Dad, I said, touching his elbow, can I talk to you for a moment, privately? He frowned slightly, clearly annoyed at being pulled away from his audience, but decades of social training kicked in. Of course, sweetheart. Gentlemen, excuse me. I led him to a quiet corner of the garden where fairy lights cast everything in a soft glow. He checked his watch immediately, a gesture I remembered so well from my first life. Richard Hartley had never had time for me. What is it, Vivian? The speech starts in 15 minutes and I want to talk about Hartley Enterprises. That got his attention. His eyebrows rose. What about it? I want a position there. A real one, not an internship. Something in development or acquisitions? He laughed. It was a patronizing sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Sweetheart, you don't have the experience for that. Maybe in a few years after you've built up your resume. I have a master's in business administration from Columbia, I said calmly. I'd finished it early in this timeline, taking summer courses and extra credits. I graduated top of my class. I've been consulting for 3 different firms in my spare time, and I have recommendations from all of them. I'm more qualified than Melissa was when you gave her the VP position. His face hardened. Your sister earned that position. Did she? Because I seem to remember her failing out of her MBA program at Yale and coming home. You gave her the VP position as a consolation prize. That's not... He stopped, clearly trying to control his temper. Vivian, I don't know what's gotten into you today, but this isn't appropriate. It's your wedding day. We can discuss your career another time. No, we'll discuss it now. I kept my voice level, professional. This was the conversation I dreamed of having in my first life, but never had the courage to initiate. Because in about 6 months, Blackwood Industries is going to approach you about a merger, Marcus has already mentioned it to me. It's going to be the biggest deal of your career. His eyes sharpened. How do you know about that? Because my husband tells me things, because I pay attention, because unlike what you think, I'm not stupid or useless. I never said you were. You didn't have to. You've been showing me my entire life. I took a breath, steadying myself. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me a position at Hartley Enterprises, a real one with actual responsibilities. And when the Blackwood merger comes through, I'm going to be the one who manages it. That's absurd. Melissa is already set to. Melissa doesn't know the first thing about real estate development. She's been coasting on your name and your money her entire career. But I've been studying Blackwood Industries for 2 years. I know their portfolio, their weaknesses, their expansion plans. I know exactly what they want from this merger and exactly what you should ask for in return. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him reevaluating, recalculating. Richard Hartley was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He knew talent when he saw it. He'd just never bothered to look for it in me before. Why now? He asked finally. Why are you suddenly so aggressive about this? Because I'm tired of being invisible, I said simply. Because I'm married to Marcus Blackwood now, which makes me an asset you can't afford to ignore. And because if you don't give me this opportunity, I'll take what I know to your competitors. It was a bluff, mostly. But he didn't know that. You'd betray your own family? Would I? Or would I finally just be putting myself first for once? I met his eyes steadily. Make your choice, Dad, but make it now. The silence stretched between us. Somewhere in the distance, the band was playing. I could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of my wedding reception continuing without us. Finally, Richard Hartley sighed. Fine, come to my office Monday morning. We'll discuss terms. I want VP of Strategic Development. Melissa can keep her title, but I want equal authority and equal pay. You're asking for a lot. I'm asking for what I've earned. There's a difference. He studied me for a moment longer, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Was it respect? Pride? I couldn't quite tell. You've changed, Vivian. I'm not sure if I like it. I don't need you to like it, Dad. I just need you to take me seriously. He nodded slowly. Monday, 9 a.m. Don't be late. As he walked away, I felt the first real surge of triumph. In my first life, I'd never worked at Hartley Enterprises. I'd never dared to ask. I'd let Melissa have everything while I built a quiet, invisible career in marketing that went nowhere. Not this time. This time, I was going to take what was mine. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of champagne and well wishes. Marcus kept squeezing my hand, telling me how beautiful I looked, how happy he was. I smiled and played my part, but part of me was always watching Melissa. She was drinking too much. I could see it in the way she swayed slightly, in the too loud quality of her laughter. She kept gravitating toward Marcus when I wasn't near him, touching his arm, laughing at his jokes. Several times I caught her leaning in close to him, and each time he politely stepped back. Good, he was passing the test so far, but the real test would come later. Around midnight, as the party was winding down, I found Claire and gave her the signal we'd arranged. She nodded and disappeared into the crowd. 5 minutes later, she returned with my phone and an apologetic expression. I'm so sorry, Viv, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. But there's an emergency with the honeymoon arrangements. The hotel in Bali says there's been a mistake with the booking. You need to call them right away. It was a complete fabrication, but it served its purpose. I made a show of being frustrated, then told Marcus I needed to step away to handle it. Do you want me to come with you? He asked, concerned. No, you stay. I'll only be a few minutes. This is the boring logistical stuff anyway. I kissed him quickly and headed toward the manor house where the reception was being held, Claire beside me. Once we were out of sight, we hurried to the second-floor bedroom that had been set aside for me to change in later. She's already drunk, Claire reported, and she keeps talking about how she can't believe you spoke to her that way earlier. Sophie's trying to calm her down, but it's not working. Perfect. I went to my bag and pulled out a small perfume atomizer. Inside was my original signature scent, jasmine, bergamot, and black vanilla. the perfume Melissa had tried to steal that morning. Here's what's going to happen. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to go back down. You're going to take this to the bridal suite's bathroom and leave it on the counter like it was forgotten there. Make sure the cap is loose. Claire took the atomizer, understanding dawning on her face. You think she'll... I know she will. She can't help herself. And when she does, Marcus will notice. Because he's been asking me all day why I smell different, why I changed my perfume. He's been weirdly fixated on it. In my first life, Marcus's obsession with my signature scent had been one of the early warning signs I'd missed. He'd been more attracted to the smell than to me. This time, I was going to use that weakness against him, and against Melissa. What if she doesn't take the bait? She will. She's drunk, she's angry, and she's desperate to feel like she has power over me. Taking my perfume, wearing my scent, it's her way of claiming what she thinks should be hers. Claire shook her head. Your sister is seriously messed up. You have no idea. We went back downstairs separately. I made a show of being on my phone, pretending to resolve the non-existent hotel crisis. Meanwhile, Claire slipped away toward the bridal suite. I saw Melissa watching me from across the room, her eyes slightly unfocused but still calculating. 20 minutes later, I was talking to some of Marcus's business partners when I caught it. Just the faintest hint of jasmine and bergamot on the breeze. Melissa was standing near the bar, freshly perfumed, her wrists and neck gleaming slightly where she'd obviously over-applied. She was talking to a group of Marcus's friends, laughing too loudly, being too familiar. And Marcus, who had been across the room, suddenly went very still. I watched him turn, his nostrils flaring slightly. He looked confused, searching for the source of the scent. His eyes landed on Melissa, and his frown deepened. He started walking toward her. I followed at a distance, staying just close enough to observe. Melissa, I heard him say, his voice carrying an edge I recognized from my first life. From all those times he'd compared me unfavorably to the memory of someone else. What perfume are you wearing? She blinked up at him, trying to look innocent, but mostly looking drunk. What? Oh, this? Just something I found in the bridal suite. It was just sitting there on the counter, and I thought, that's not your perfume to take, he said. And there was something hard in his voice. That's Vivian's, her signature scent. I didn't think she'd mind, Melissa said. But she was backing up now, sensing danger. We share everything. We're sisters. You're not acting like a sister. You're acting like... He stopped, and I could see the wheels turning. He was remembering the morning, the confrontation, the way Melissa had played victim. He was remembering me telling him about all the other times she'd stolen from me. He was putting pieces together. I stepped forward then, joining them. Is there a problem? Marcus turned to me, his expression troubled. She's wearing your perfume. Your original scent. The one you told me you'd stopped wearing. I did stop wearing it, I said calmly. I haven't worn it in months. Then how? He looked back at Melissa, and I saw the moment he understood. You had this planned. You've been trying to wear her perfume all along. I don't know what you're talking about, Melissa said, but her voice was shaking now. I just found a bottle in the bathroom. I didn't know it was some big deal. You knew this morning when she called you out on it, Claire said, appearing beside me. You knew when you spent 30 minutes washing it off. And you knew just now when you went looking for another bottle to steal. A small crowd was gathering now. I could see Sophie trying to push through, could see my mother's horrified face as she realized what was happening, but I kept my eyes on Melissa. Why? Marcus asked, and there was something almost sad in his voice. Why would you do this? Because she doesn't deserve you. The words burst out of Melissa like they'd been building all night. She doesn't deserve any of it. The perfect wedding, the perfect dress, the perfect husband. I'm the one who's supposed to have everything. I'm the one Mom and Dad invested everything in, not her. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the band had stopped playing. She's nothing, Melissa continued, tears streaming down her face, and these ones were real. Real anger, real jealousy, real bitterness. She's always been nothing. Just this boring, mediocre little shadow who somehow keeps winning things she doesn't deserve. And you look at her like she's special, like she's worth something, when we all know she's not. Melissa, stop, my mother hissed, trying to pull her away. But Melissa was beyond stopping now. All the poison that had built up over years, over 2 lifetimes, was pouring out of her in a torrent. She doesn't even love you, Melissa shouted at Marcus, yanking away from our mother's grip. Not really. She just wanted to beat me to the altar. She wanted to prove she could get a husband before I did. She's using you. Marcus's face had gone carefully blank. He turned to me and I could see the question in his eyes. Is that true? He asked quietly. I thought about lying. I thought about telling him I loved him with all my heart, that Melissa was just drunk and jealous. But I died in my first life because of lies, mine and everyone else's, so I told him the truth. I married you because you're brilliant and kind and because you saw me when no one else did, I said, meeting his eyes steadily. I married you because we're partners, because we challenge each other, because we make sense. Do I love you? I'm not sure yet. We've only been together 2 years. But I respect you, I care about you, and I want to build a life with you. And honestly, that's more than most people have on their wedding day. The silence was deafening. I could see the shock on people's faces that I would admit this, here now, in front of everyone. My mother looked like she might faint. Melissa's expression was somewhere between triumphant and horrified, like she'd gotten what she wanted but didn't know what to do with it. But Marcus was smiling, just slightly, but it was there. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me, he said. Then he looked at Melissa. You want to know why I chose Vivian? Not because she's perfect. She's not. Not because she's desperate to please everyone. She spent our entire relationship challenging me and calling me on my bullshit. I chose her because she's real. She doesn't play games. She doesn't pretend to be something she's not. He took my hand and his grip was firm and warm. You spent all day trying to wear her scent, trying to be her, trying to take what's hers, he continued. But you'll never be her. Because Vivian doesn't need to steal other people's identity to have value. She has her own. Melissa made a sound like a wounded animal. Then she turned and ran, pushing through the crowd, her chartreuse dress flashing in the lights. My mother followed, calling after her, her heels clicking frantically on the stone patio. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus turned to the band. Can we have some music, please? The band started playing again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. Conversations resumed, though everyone was still glancing our way. Marcus pulled me close and began to sway to the music. That was insane, he murmured against my hair. You're insane. Probably, I admitted. Are you upset? About which part? The fact that you're not sure you love me yet? Or the fact that you just let your sister self-destruct at our wedding reception? Either, both. He was quiet second for a moment, just holding me as we moved to the music. I'm not upset, he said finally. I'm relieved, actually. I've been waiting for you to be this honest with me. You've been holding back since we met. Like you were afraid I'd run if I saw the real you. But this, he pulled back to look at me. This is who you really are. Someone who doesn't take shit from anyone. Someone who fights back. I like her. I felt something loosen in my chest. Some knot I'd been carrying since I died. Even if she's a little bit terrifying? Especially if she's a little bit terrifying. We danced for a few more minutes and I let myself relax into his arms. Around us, the reception was returning to normal. People were laughing again, drinking again, enjoying themselves. The Melissa drama was already becoming a story they'd tell later. Remember when the bride's sister had that meltdown at the wedding? But this was only the beginning. I'd exposed Melissa publicly, yes. I'd humiliated her in a way she'd never forget. But that wasn't revenge. That was just self-defense. Real revenge would take time. Monday morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. I dressed carefully for my meeting with my father, a sharp black suit, minimal jewelry, my dark perfume. I looked nothing like the daughter he'd ignored for 24 years and everything like a woman who belonged in a boardroom. Marcus was already gone by the time I left. We'd cut our honeymoon short. I'd told him I had a job opportunity I couldn't miss, and he'd understood immediately. "Go get what's yours," he'd said, kissing me goodbye. "Just promise me you'll come to Bali for our first anniversary." I'd promised and I'd meant it. But right now, Bali was the last thing on my mind. Hartley Enterprises was housed in a gleaming glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. I'd been here exactly 3 times in my first life. Once for a family event, once to drop off my father's forgotten briefcase, and once to beg for a loan that he'd refused. None of those visits had ended well. This time, I walked through the lobby with my head high. The receptionist recognized me. How could she not? After the wedding that had apparently dominated the society pages over the weekend, and buzzed me through immediately. "Your father's expecting you, Mrs. Blackwood." Mrs. Blackwood. I hadn't quite gotten used to the name yet. My father's office was on the 42nd floor, corner suite with a view of Central Park. His assistant, a severe woman named Margaret who had worked for him for 20 years, barely looked up as I entered. "He's on a call, have a seat." I sat, crossing my legs and pulling out my phone. I'd come prepared with a full presentation on the Blackwood merger. Spreadsheets, projections, risk analyses. Everything I'd been compiling in secret for the past 6 months, ever since I'd realized that manipulating this merger was going to be key to everything. 20 minutes later, Margaret's phone buzzed. "You can go in now." My father's office was exactly as I remembered. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls covered in photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and CEOs. Not a single family photo among them. "Vivian," he said, not looking up from his computer. "Close the door." I did, then took the seat across from his desk without waiting to be invited. He noticed that I saw his eyebrow rise slightly, but he didn't comment. "I've been thinking about our conversation on Saturday," he began, finally looking at me. "And I've decided that I may have been hasty in my assessment of your capabilities." It wasn't an apology. Richard Hartley didn't apologize, but it was as close as I was going to get. "I appreciate that," I said evenly. "However, VP of Strategic Development is too much too fast. I can offer you Director of Business Development. You'll report to Melissa, but you'll have autonomy over your projects." "No." He blinked. "No? I don't work under Melissa. She's incompetent, and we both know it. Give me VP or give me nothing." "Vivian, you need to be realistic." "I am being realistic. Blackwood Industries is going to approach you in—" I checked my watch. "Approximately 4 hours. Marcus's father is scheduled to call you at 2 p.m. to set up a preliminary meeting. They want to merge their commercial real estate division with your residential development arm. It's a $2.3 billion deal." My father had gone very still. "How do you know this?" "Because my husband tells me things. Because I've been preparing for this since before we got engaged. And because I'm the only person in this company who understands both sides of the deal well enough to negotiate terms that won't bankrupt you." That's a bold claim. It's a true one. I pulled out my tablet and brought up my presentation. Blackwood Industries has been losing money on their commercial portfolio for 3 years. They need this merger more than you do, but they're going to try to make it look like they're doing you a favor. They're going to push for a 60-40 split in their favor. Don't take it. I turned the tablet so he could see my analysis. Their commercial properties are overvalued by approximately 30%. Half of them are in markets that are about to crash. If you merge at their proposed terms, you'll be absorbing their losses and tanking your stock price. My father was leaning forward now, studying the numbers. "What do you propose?" 55-45 in our favor. We take their profitable properties and make them divest the losers before the merger finalizes. We position it as streamlining for efficiency. They'll resist, but they need this deal to avoid a shareholders' revolt. They'll cave. And you know this how? Because I've been studying their quarterly reports for 2 years. Because I know which board members are pushing for the merger and why. Because I'm married to the heir and I pay attention. I met his eyes. I'm not asking for this position because I'm your daughter, Dad. I'm asking for it because I'm the best person for the job. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he nodded slowly. VP of Strategic Development, 3-month probationary period. If you screw up the Blackwood merger, you're out. Deal. He pulled out a contract. He'd had it prepared already, I realized. He'd known I wouldn't accept less. We negotiated terms for another hour. Salary, benefits, equity options. Everything I'd been denied in my first life, I fought for now. When I finally left his office, I had everything I'd asked for and more. Margaret actually smiled at me on my way out. About time someone challenged him, she said quietly. Good luck, Mrs. Blackwood. I was going to need it. The next 6 months were a masterclass in corporate warfare. The Blackwood merger negotiations were brutal. Marcus's father, Gerald Blackwood, was a shark who'd built his empire by devouring smaller companies. He came into the first meeting expecting to intimidate my father into a bad deal. He hadn't expected me. Mrs. Blackwood, he'd said when I'd walked into the conference room with my father. How lovely to see you. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. I'm VP of Strategic Development, I'd said smoothly, taking a seat at the table. This is my portfolio. Gerald had looked at my father, who'd just shrugged. My daughter's assessment of your commercial holdings was quite thorough. I thought she should be here to discuss it. What followed was 4 hours of the most intense negotiation I'd ever experienced. Gerald tried every tactic: intimidation, flattery, appeals to family loyalty. But I held firm. I walked him through every overvalued property, every hidden liability, every reason why his 60-40 proposal was insulting. You're asking my father to bail out your failing commercial division, I'd said at one point. That's not a merger. That's a rescue operation. And rescue operations don't come cheap. Marcus had been there too, sitting on his father's side of the table, but saying very little. A few times I'd caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, concern, attraction, all three. We'd walked out of that meeting with Gerald agreeing to have his team review my proposals. It wasn't a win yet, but it was progress. You were brilliant, Marcus had told me that night over dinner. Terrifying, but brilliant. My father is furious. Good, he should be. He was trying to screw over my father, which means he was trying to screw over me. Are you sure this is what you want? He'd asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. This kind of pressure, this kind of conflict, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I know, I'd said. But this is who I am now. The person who fights back. You said you liked her, remember? He'd smiled. I'm falling in love with her, actually. My heart had done something complicated in my chest. Yeah, I'd squeezed his hand. Good, because I think I'm starting to fall for you, too. It was true. This Marcus, the one who saw me as an equal, who challenged me and supported me and didn't expect me to be small, was someone I could love, maybe already did love. While the Blackwood merger crawled forward, I was also systematically dismantling Melissa's position at the company. It was easier than I'd expected. Melissa had spent years skating by on nepotism and charm, but she'd never actually done the work. Her projects were poorly managed, her reports were plagiarized from her assistants, and her strategic decisions were based on gut feelings rather than data. All I had to do was ask questions. Melissa, can you walk me through the financials on the Harbor Point development? Can you explain your logic for the pricing structure on the Westchester project? I'm having trouble understanding your risk assessment here. Can you clarify? Every question exposed another gap in her knowledge. Every meeting revealed another shortcut she'd taken. Within 3 months, it was clear to everyone in the company that Melissa Hartley was dead weight. My father started assigning her projects to me instead. At first, it was just the ones she'd been struggling with. Then it was the new initiatives. Then it was everything important. Melissa, to her credit, tried to fight back. She went to our mother, who stormed into my father's office demanding to know why he was sabotaging her daughter. She complained to HR that I was creating a hostile work environment. She even tried to turn my staff against me by spreading rumors that I was sleeping with vendors to get better deals. None of it worked because I'd prepared for this. I had documentation of every conversation, every meeting, every decision. I had testimonials from colleagues. I had results, and results spoke louder than rumors. By month 5, there was talk of restructuring Melissa's role. By month 6, she was barely showing up to the office anymore. And through it all, she kept wearing knockoff versions of my original perfume. I'd see her at family dinners, the ones I still attended out of strategic necessity, and she'd reek of cheap jasmine and synthetic bergamot. She'd bought some approximation from a department store, and she wore it constantly, desperately, like a talisman. "You're pathetic," she'd hissed at me at one dinner, cornering me in the bathroom. "You think you've won, but everyone knows you're just Marcus's puppet. You wouldn't have any of this without him." "Maybe," I'd said, washing my hands calmly, but I have it. That's what matters. He's going to leave you, just like everyone leaves you. Is that what you're hoping? That if Marcus leaves me, you can swoop in and take him too? Her face had flushed red. "I don't want your husband." "No? Then why are you still wearing my perfume? Why are you still trying so hard to be me?" I dried my hands and turned to face her. "Here's the thing you never understood, Melissa. You can wear my perfume, you can copy my style, you can even try to steal my husband, but you'll never have what I have, because what I have isn't things, it's me. My mind, my skills, my ability to actually earn what I receive. And those things, you can't steal them." She'd slapped me then, hard enough to leave a red mark on my cheek. I'd smiled. "Thanks for that." "What?" "The cameras in the hallway caught that. I'll be filing an HR complaint first thing Monday morning. Assault of a coworker is grounds for immediate termination, isn't it?" Her face had gone white. "You wouldn't. Watch me." Monday morning, I filed the complaint. By Monday afternoon, Melissa was on administrative leave pending investigation. By the end of the week, my father's lawyers had presented her with a choice: resign quietly or be fired publicly. She resigned. The day Melissa cleaned out her office, I watched from my window. She carried a single box, not even full, to her car. 26 years old and already washed up in the family business. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? Her humiliated, exposed, removed from the power structure that had protected her. But all I felt was tired. "Having second thoughts?" Marcus asked. He'd stopped by my office for lunch, as had become our habit. "No, just remembering." He knew what I meant. Over the past months, I'd told him everything. Not about dying and being reborn, but about the years of abuse, the theft, the gaslighting. He'd listened without judgment, holding my hand, letting me process decades of pain. "She made her choices," he said now. "You're just making sure she faces the consequences." "I know, it's just—" I paused, trying to find the words. "In another life, I let her destroy me because I thought that's what family meant. Sacrifice and forgiveness and endless chances. But it's not, is it? Real family doesn't tear you down to lift themselves up." "No," he agreed, "but they don't." My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Your mother's in the lobby. She's demanding to see you." "Here we go," I muttered. Catherine Hartley was a force of nature when she wanted to be. She swept into my office 5 minutes later like an avenging angel, her designer suit perfectly pressed, her hair perfectly coiffed, her expression perfectly furious. "How dare you," she said, not bothering with preamble. "How dare you destroy your sister like this?" "Hello, Mother. Lovely to see you too." "Don't be flippant. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Melissa is devastated. Absolutely devastated. She's been crying for days. Has she? I kept my tone mild. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? That's all you have to say? Catherine's voice was rising. This is your sister, Vivian, your own flesh and blood, and you've ruined her career, her reputation, her life. No, Mother. Melissa ruined her own career by being incompetent and lazy. I just stopped covering for her. You never covered for her. You've always been jealous of her. Jealous? I stood up and something in my movement made Catherine take a step back. Of what exactly? Her mediocrity? Her inability to succeed without stealing my work? Her desperate need for validation that she demands everyone else sacrifice themselves to provide? She's your sister, Catherine repeated as if that explained everything. And you're my mother, I said quietly. But you stopped acting like it when I was 6 years old. Do you remember my 8th grade science fair? I won first place. You didn't come because you were helping Melissa shop for a dress for a dance. Do you remember my high school graduation? I was valedictorian. You missed my speech because you were taking Melissa to a college visit. Do you remember? My voice cracked slightly. Do you remember a single important moment in my life that you actually showed up for? Catherine's face had gone pale. I was doing my best. Your best was abandoning one daughter to cater to another. Your best was letting Melissa steal from me, bully me, sabotage me, and telling me I should be grateful for the scraps I got. Your best was teaching me that I had no value unless I could be useful to her. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you asked about my life, my work, my marriage? When was the last time I was anything to you except a supporting character in Melissa's story? Silence. Complete, devastating silence. You've changed, Catherine said finally, her voice small. You used to be such a sweet girl. No, Mother. I used to be a doormat. There's a difference. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something crumble in her expression. Not guilt. Catherine Hartley was too proud for guilt. But perhaps the first faint recognition that she'd miscalculated somewhere along the way. I don't know who you are anymore, she said. Good, I replied. Neither did I, until recently. She left without another word. Marcus, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the entire exchange, came over and wrapped his arms around me. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said and meant it. I really am. The Blackwood merger finalized 8 months after our wedding. The final terms were everything I'd fought for, 56% Hartley, 44% Blackwood, with all the losing properties divested before the merger. It was hailed as one of the shrewdest deals in recent real estate history. My father gave me a bonus that was triple my annual salary. Gerald Blackwood grudgingly admitted I had a head for business, and Marcus took me to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan to celebrate. You did it, he said, raising his champagne glass. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have had access to Blackwood's internal numbers without you. True, but you're the one who knew what to do with them. He took my hand across the table. I have something to ask you. If it's about having kids, I need at least 2 more years to... It's not about kids. Though we should discuss that eventually. He took a breath. I want you to come work for Blackwood Industries. I blinked. What? Head of acquisitions. You'd be reporting directly to me. I'm taking over as CEO next month. Full autonomy, equity stake, and a salary that's going to make your father's bonus look like pocket change. Marcus, before you say no, hear me out. You've proven yourself at Hartley. You've shown everyone what you can do. But you're always going to be Richard Hartley's daughter there. You're always going to be compared to Melissa, always going to have to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. He squeezed my hand. At Blackwood, you'd just be Vivian Blackwood, the woman who negotiated the deal of the decade. You'd be building your own legacy instead of cleaning up someone else's mess. I thought about it. About Hartley Enterprises and my father's conditional pride. About Melissa's ghost haunting every hallway. About the years I'd spent in both lifetimes trying to prove I deserved to exist in spaces that were never meant for me. Yes, I said, his face lit up. Really? Really, but I have one condition. Name it. I want to start an acquisition fund specifically for women-led businesses, small companies with potential that traditional investors overlook. I want to find the women who are where I was, underestimated, underfunded, fighting for scraps, and I want to give them a chance. Marcus's smile grew wider. You know what? That's a brilliant idea, not just ethically, though it is, but financially. Women-led businesses are statistically more profitable and less likely to fail. We'd be tapping an underutilized market. So that's a yes? That's an enthusiastic yes. When can you start? 2 weeks. I need to give proper notice and transition my projects. And I need to tell Buzz, my father, in person. He deserves that much. Richard Hartley was surprisingly understanding when I gave him the news, or maybe not so surprising. He'd built his entire empire on the idea that people should pursue their own success. I can't say I didn't see this coming, he said, leaning back in his chair. You've outgrown this place. Hell, you outgrew it before you even started. I learned everything I know here, I said. Maybe, but you learned it despite this place, not because of it. He paused. I owe you an apology, Vivian. I must have looked shocked because he smiled slightly. Don't look so surprised. I'm capable of self-reflection occasionally. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. I failed you as a father. I let your mother dictate how we treated you and Melissa, and I told myself it was because I didn't want to interfere in parenting decisions. But the truth is, I was a coward. It was easier to focus on work than to deal with family dynamics. Dad, let me finish. He turned to face me. Melissa was always the easy child. She demanded attention and I gave it to her, but you were self-sufficient. You didn't ask for help, didn't make noise, didn't force me to pay attention. And I took the easy route. I told myself you were fine because acknowledging that you weren't would have required me to change, and I didn't want to. There were tears in my eyes. I hadn't expected this in either lifetime. You're my daughter, he continued. Both of you are, and I failed you both, just in different ways. Melissa never learned to stand on her own because I never made her, and you never learned that you deserve support because I never gave it to you. He paused. I'm proud of you, Vivian. Prouder than I know how to express. And I'm sorry it took me so long to tell you. I stood and crossed the room to him. Thank you, I said quietly. He hugged me awkwardly, unpracticed, but genuine. Go build your empire. And when you're ready, maybe you can teach me how to be a better grandfather. I pulled back, surprised. Marcus and I aren't, not yet. But someday. He smiled. And when that day comes, I promise I'll do better. I'll be better. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't enough to undo 24 years of neglect. But it was something. It was a start. My first year at Blackwood Industries was everything I'd hoped for and more. I built my acquisition fund from the ground up, investing in 12 companies in the first 6 months. I traveled constantly, meeting entrepreneurs, reviewing business plans, taking risks on women that traditional venture capital firms dismissed. And I was good at it. Really good. By the end of the year, 3 of my investments had already doubled in value. 2 had been acquired by larger companies at substantial premiums. The business press started calling me the woman with the Midas touch. Marcus and I were profiled in Fortune magazine, the power couple, reshaping real estate. In the photo, we stood on the roof of Blackwood Tower, the city sprawling behind us. I was wearing my dark perfume, oud and leather and rose, and Marcus had his arm around my waist. You look happy, he'd said when he saw the photo. I am happy. I love you, he'd told me, not for the first time. I love you too, I'd replied, and meant it completely. The person I'd been in my first life, quiet, accommodating, desperate for approval, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, sharper, more certain. Someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. Someone who remembered what it cost to be small. I didn't see Melissa for almost a year after she left Hartley Enterprises. She'd disappeared into wherever people go when they crash and burn publicly. I heard through family channels that she'd moved to California, that she was finding herself, that she was dating some tech startup founder. I didn't think about her much. I was too busy building my own life. But then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, my assistant buzzed me. "There's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." I almost said to send her away. Almost. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." I used those 5 minutes to center myself, to remember that I'd won, that Melissa couldn't hurt me anymore. She looked different when she walked into my office. Thinner, older somehow, despite only a year passing. Her clothes were expensive, but not quite right. Designer labels worn just slightly wrong, like she'd bought them but didn't know how to style them. And she was wearing that terrible fake jasmine perfume, the one that smelled like desperation and drugstore counters. "Vivian," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Thank you for seeing me." "Melissa, sit down." She sat, perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me." "You're right. I don't. But I needed to see you, to talk to you." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I've been in therapy, a lot of therapy, and I've realized," she took a shaky breath, "I've realized how terrible I was to you. How terrible I've been our entire lives." I didn't respond, just waited. "I was jealous," she continued, "of everything about you. You made everything look so easy: school, work, relationships. And I had to fight for every scrap of approval from mom and dad. I had to be perfect all the time or risk losing everything. And you just existed and people liked you." "That's not true." "It is, though. People gravitate to you naturally. To me, they have to be convinced. Do you know how exhausting that is? Constantly performing, constantly trying to be enough?" Tears were sliding down her face now. "I'm not making excuses. What I did was inexcusable. Stealing your work, sabotaging your relationships, trying to steal Marcus." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Viv. I'm so sorry." I studied her for the past long moment. In my first life, this might have been enough. The apology I'd always wanted, the acknowledgement of pain I'd always craved. But I died because of her, maybe not physically in this timeline, but the version of me that had been beaten down and poisoned and destroyed. That death was still real in my memory. "I forgive you," I said finally. Her face lit up with hope. "But I don't trust you. And I don't want you in my life." The hope died. "Vivian, you're sorry, I believe you, but sorry doesn't undo decades of abuse. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent thinking I was worthless because you and mom convinced me I was. Sorry doesn't heal the damage you did. I want to make it right. You can't. There is no making this right. There's only accepting that you destroyed something that can't be fixed and living with that knowledge." She was crying harder now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "Please, you're my sister." "No," I said gently. "I'm not. Not anymore. We're just two people who share DNA and a traumatic past, and that's all we'll ever be." "I don't accept that." "You don't have a choice." I stood, signaling the meeting was over. "I hope you find peace, Melissa. I really do. I hope therapy helps. I hope you build a better life in California. But that life can't include me. Not now, maybe not ever." She stood too, unsteady on her feet. "I love you," she said desperately. "I loved you too, once. But you killed that love systematically over 24 years. You can't resurrect it with a single apology and cheap perfume." She flinched like I'd struck her. "It's not cheap. It's not your perfume," I interrupted. "It's a knockoff of mine. And that's who you are, Melissa. A knockoff." a copy of a copy, getting more distorted with each iteration, until you figure out who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who mom wanted you to be, but who you actually are. You'll always smell desperate. She left without another word. I watched her go from my window, a small figure getting into a lift, still crying, still wearing someone else's scent. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet relief, like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. My phone rang. Marcus. Hey, I said, answering. I was just thinking about you. Good thoughts, I hope. Listen, I know we talked about waiting, but I've been thinking about what you said about starting your acquisition fund specifically to help women who were overlooked. And I wondered, what if we started a family? What if we gave a kid the childhood we both wish we'd had? I looked out at the city, at the empire I'd built from ashes and second chances and refusing to stay small. Yeah, I said, let's do that. Let's build something better. 5 years later, I stood in the nursery of our penthouse holding my daughter. She was 6 months old, with Marcus's dark hair and my gray eyes. We'd named her Hope because that's what she represented, hope for a future that wasn't poisoned by the past. There's someone here to see you, Marcus said from the doorway. Who? Your father and your mother. I hadn't spoken to Catherine in 3 years. Not since she'd sent me a vicious email after Melissa's visit, accusing me of being heartless and cruel. I'd blocked her number and moved on. Tell them, I paused. Hope made a small sound and I adjusted her position. Actually, tell them to come up. My parents looked older than I'd expected when they walked in. My father's hair had gone completely white. My mother had new lines around her mouth, deepened by years of pursing her lips in disapproval. Vivian, my father said warmly, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. Congratulations, she's beautiful. Thank you. Catherine hung back, uncertain. Hello, Vivian? Mother. An awkward silence fell. Hope fussed slightly and I bounced her gently. Would you like to hold her? I asked my father. I would love to. I passed Hope over, watching as my father's face transformed. He'd always been austere, distant. But holding his granddaughter, he looked almost tender. She has your eyes, he said softly. And your stubbornness, apparently. She never sleeps when she's supposed to. He laughed, a sound I'd heard maybe a dozen times in my entire life. Like grandmother, like granddaughter. I glanced at Catherine, who was standing frozen near the door, watching the scene with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pain? Regret? Longing? Would you like to hold her too? I asked quietly. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. May I? Yes. She crossed the room carefully, as if afraid a sudden movement might shatter the moment. My father transferred Hope to her arms, and I watched my mother's face crumble and rebuild itself as she looked down at my daughter. She's perfect, Catherine whispered. Absolutely perfect. She is, I agreed. We stood there for a moment, the three of us, watching Hope yawn and stretch in her grandmother's arms. Finally, Catherine looked up at me. I've been seeing a therapist, she said, for 2 years now, working through a lot of things. About how I parented you and Melissa. About the choices I made. She paused, tears tracking down her face. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. How badly I failed you. How much damage I did. Okay, I said simply. I know I can't undo it, can't fix what I broke. But if you're willing, if you'd let me, I'd like to try to be a good grandmother to Hope. To give her what I never gave you. I thought about saying no, about protecting my daughter from the woman who'd hurt me so deeply. But I also thought about what I'd learned over the past 5 years, that people could change, that growth was possible, that holding on to anger hurt me more than it hurt anyone else. We can start small, I said, supervised visits. No promises beyond that. And the first time you show favoritism, the first time you make Hope feel like she's less than enough, we're done. Permanently. I understand, Catherine said, nodding quickly. Thank you. Thank you for the chance. Don't thank me yet. Earn it. We talked for another hour, stiffly at first, then with increasing ease. My father told stories about Hartley Enterprises, about the changes he'd made after I left. Catherine asked careful questions about Hope's routines, her preferences, if there was anything she should know. When they left, my mother hugged me at the door, tentatively, like she'd forgotten how. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I should have said it years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Even though I had nothing to do with it. Especially because I had nothing to do with it. After they were gone, Marcus found me standing in the nursery again, watching Hope sleep in her crib. You okay? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Yeah, just thinking about how strange life is, how you can die and come back and everything can be different. You didn't die, love. You just woke up. I smiled. He didn't know how literally true that was. I'd never told him about my rebirth. Some things were too impossible to explain. But in a way, he was right. I hadn't died. I'd just finally stopped being dead inside. What happened to Melissa? I asked. Have you heard anything recently? Actually, yes, she got engaged. Some guy in Silicon Valley who founded an AI startup. Your father mentioned it last week. Good for her. You mean that? I do. I hope she's happy. I hope she figured out who she is without me to define herself against. I turned in his arms to face him. I spent so long being angry at her, and the anger was justified. But carrying it around was like drinking poison and expecting her to die. Letting it go doesn't mean what she did was okay. It just means I'm choosing to be free. Marcus kissed me softly. Have I mentioned lately that you're the most remarkable person I know? Not in the last hour or so. Well, you are. Hope made a small sound in her sleep, and we both turned to look at her. She was perfect, this tiny person we'd created, this symbol of everything I'd fought for. She would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing she was valuable, knowing she didn't have to be small to deserve space. She would never wear someone else's scent and call it her own. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood on a stage at a women's entrepreneurship conference giving the keynote speech. The woman introducing me was reading from my biography, the impressive list of companies I'd acquired, the investments I'd made, the women I'd helped. But she didn't know the real story. She didn't know about the first lifetime, the poison, the betrayal. She didn't know that every success I'd achieved was built on the foundation of my own death and resurrection. And now, she concluded, please welcome Vivian Blackwood, founder and CEO of Hartley Blackwood Ventures. The applause was deafening. I walked to the podium looking out at the sea of faces. Hundreds of women, all of them fighting their own battles, carrying their own scars. I want to tell you a story about, I began. About a girl who spent the first 24 years of her life making herself small. Who believed that taking up space was selfish, that asking for what she deserved was greedy, that fighting back was cruel. I paused, taking a breath. That girl died. The room was completely silent now. Not literally, though there were times she wished for it. She died in the way that matters most. She disappeared. She erased herself. She wore other people's perfume and called it her own identity. She lived other people's dreams and called it her own life. I saw heads nodding in the audience. They understood. But then she had a revelation. Not from death, but from hitting rock bottom so hard she couldn't fall any further. And she realized something crucial. Being kind doesn't mean being weak. Being generous doesn't mean being a doormat. Being loving doesn't mean accepting abuse. More nodding. Some women were crying. So she changed everything. She stopped apologizing for existing. She stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. She stopped wearing scents that weren't hers and found her own fragrance, something dark and complex and unapologetically powerful. I touched my wrist where I wore my signature oud perfume, the one I'd created after my rebirth, the one that smelled like survival and strength. And you know what happened? She became remarkable. Not because she was perfect, but because she was finally, authentically herself. She built an empire. She found love. She created a legacy. She became the woman she was always meant to be before the world convinced her to be smaller. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting this to thousands more watching online. If you take nothing else from this talk, take this. Your signature scent, your true identity, your authentic self is the most valuable thing you own. Don't let anyone steal it. Don't let anyone convince you that someone else's perfume suits you better. And if you've already lost yourself trying to please others, trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, it's not too late. You can start over. You can rebuild. You can become who you were always meant to be. The applause when I finished was thunderous. Women stood, crying, cheering, some of them holding up signs with phrases from my speech already scrawled on them. Backstage, Marcus was waiting with Hope, who is now 5 years old, and her little brother James, who was 3. "Mommy was amazing," Hope declared, hugging my legs. "Mommy is always amazing," Marcus corrected, kissing my temple. "But yes, that was particularly spectacular." My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Standing ovation. You earned it. Proud of you." Then one from Claire. "I'm crying." That was everything. And finally, surprisingly, one from an unknown number. "That was brave. Thank you. M. Melissa." She'd watched. She'd heard. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. "Come on," Marcus said, taking my hand. "Let's go home." Home. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, filled with art and books and Hope's drawings and James's toys. The home I'd built, the life I'd created, the family I'd chosen. We walked out of the convention center into the crisp autumn air, and I caught a whiff of my own perfume, oud and leather and dark rose. The scent of someone who'd died and been reborn. The scent of someone who'd fought her way back from oblivion. My signature scent. Mine alone. Never to be stolen again. And I smiled. Epilogue, 5 years later. The article in the Wall Street Journal was titled "The Blackwood Effect: How One Woman Changed the Face of Venture Capital." It chronicled my 15-year journey from overlooked daughter to one of the most successful investors in the country. It detailed my acquisition fund, which had now backed over 200 women-led businesses with a success rate that outperformed Silicon Valley's top firms. It discussed my methodology, finding the women who reminded me of myself, the ones who'd been told they weren't enough, and giving them the resources to prove everyone wrong. But what made the article go viral wasn't the business success. It was the sidebar, a brief mention of Melissa Hartley, my estranged sister, who'd been arrested 3 months earlier for securities fraud in connection with her husband's failed startup. She'd helped him cook the books, she'd lied to investors, she'd stolen millions. And when the investigators dug deeper, they found something else, a pattern of identity theft going back years. Melissa had been using my name, my credentials, my reputation to open doors for herself and her husband. She'd been telling investors she was affiliated with Hartley Blackwood Ventures. She'd been wearing my old signature scent. She'd somehow found someone to recreate it, and introducing herself at networking events as Vivian's sister, her partner in several ventures. The fraud had finally caught up with her. The morning the article came out, my phone rang. My father. "Have you seen it?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm sorry, Vivian. I'm so sorry. I never thought she'd—" His voice cracked. "I failed both of you. Failed you by ignoring you. Failed her by indulging her. And now—" "Dad, stop." I was sitting in my office watching the sunrise over Manhattan. "You didn't make her do this. She made her own choices. We all did. The lawyers say she's looking at significant prison time." "I know. Your mother wants to visit her, to support her through the trial. That's her choice." There was a long pause. "Don't you feel anything? Anger? Vindication? Sadness? I thought about it. Thought about the girl I'd been in my first life, poisoned and betrayed. Thought about the woman I'd become in this one, strong and successful and free. I feel sorry for her, I said finally. She spent her entire life trying to be me, trying to have what I have. And she never understood that you can't steal someone else's life. You have to build your own. That's very gracious. It's not grace, Dad, it's just truth. And maybe, I paused, choosing my words carefully. Maybe this is what she needs. To hit bottom completely. To have nowhere to hide, no one to blame. Maybe prison will give her what years of therapy couldn't. A chance to finally figure out who Melissa Hartley actually is. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my office. On my desk was a photo of my family, Marcus and me, Hope and James, and Hope's new baby sister, Joy, who was just 3 months old. We were laughing in the picture, genuinely happy, completely present. I picked up my perfume, my signature oud and rose, the scent that had become so associated with me that luxury brands had approached me about licensing it. The scent that was undeniably, authentically mine. I dabbed a bit on my wrists and closed my eyes. In another life, I would have been the one in prison, or dead. In another life, Melissa would have taken everything and called it justice. But in this life, I'd fought back. I'd rebuilt myself from ashes. I'd refused to be small, and that had made all the difference. My assistant buzzed. Your 9 o'clock is here. The founders of that educational tech startup you were interested in. Send them in. 2 young women entered, nervous, hopeful, wearing their best interview clothes. They reminded me of myself at their age, full of potential, but unsure if anyone would see it. I smiled at them. Tell me about your vision, I said. Tell me what makes you remarkable. And as they began to speak, I caught a whiff of cheap perfume, something floral and generic, the kind you buy when you can't afford better, the kind I used to wear when I thought I didn't deserve more. Before we begin, I interrupted gently, pulling a small card from my drawer. There's a perfumer in Brooklyn who does custom scents. She's brilliant and affordable. Tell her I sent you. I handed them the card. Every woman should have a signature scent. Something that's entirely her own. Something that makes people remember her. They looked confused but took the card. Trust me, I said. It matters more than you think. Then we began discussing their business plan, their projections, their dreams. And I listened, really listened, the way no one had ever listened to me in my first life. The way I would listen to every woman who walked through my door for the rest of my life. Because I remembered what it was like to be invisible, to wear someone else's scent and call it your own, to die a little every day until there was nothing left. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure no other woman had to learn that lesson the hard way. The sun was fully up now, flooding my office with light. Outside, the city was waking up. Millions of people starting their days, fighting their own battles, building their own empires. And me? I was exactly where I was meant to be. Finally, completely, unapologetically myself, wearing my own perfume, living my own life, building my own legacy. The girl who had died had been reborn as a woman who would never die again. And that, I thought as I leaned forward to discuss terms with the hopeful entrepreneurs in front of me, was the sweetest revenge of all.